There are two runes in Lost Ark that are fundamental to many classes' playstyles, but a large portion of the player base doesn't fully grasp how they work. Conviction and Judgment, as mentioned previously, are a part of many classes' builds and rotations, with the runes being a major part of the majority of swiftness builds in the game. Welcome to this video. Before we get into the rune specifics, we need to get some baseline fundamental knowledge so that anyone of any level of experience in Lost Ark can understand. Cooldowns of skills in this game, a majority of the time, center around your swiftness stat and your cooldown gems. There are separate cases where tripods on skills have a requirement, typically that you hit an enemy in some format and it will refresh, but most of the time it's the swift stat and your cooldown gems. So if you're a swiftness based class, you can imagine you're ideally throwing a lot of moves, typically off cooldown, to really maximize on your damage. Small damage per hit, but many hits to access higher total damage. This is where you run into the next piece of information that you need to understand before we can get into the how and why of Conviction and Judgment runes. It is probably not a shock to hear, but every move consumes a variable amount of mana depending on the skill, with variables attached like relic set or if you have the focus rune attached to said skill. Now, similar to the last point, there are a few class exemptions to the mana rule. Classes like Scrapper have a different system in place, and a class like the DI Shadowhunter doesn't consume any mana at all while they're in form. So you can imagine now that a class that has high swiftness and is throwing many moves per minute likely will run into mana issues. This is typically where swiftness classes run into some despair. They go being out of mana. When this occurs, even if your cooldowns are instant, you can't throw a move until the cost of mana of that move is replenished. But with no intervention and being able to constantly hit, the will continue. As mentioned previously, there are ways to deal with the mana issues like Nightmare Relic Set, Focus Runes, and Consumables, but mana issues are typically a throw the whole book at it type of thing, so you don't have to deal with it, unless you're an Nightmare enjoyer. This is where the Conviction and Judgment runes come in. If set up properly, you will receive a 100% increase of combat recovery resources, mana in this case, and 15% skill cooldown for 6 seconds. Now this is typically where understanding ends for the average Lost Ark player, as the wording isn't clear, and to be honest, unless you are scrolling Reddit posts or have someone in your raid group explain it to you, it's kind of hard after a quick viewing of the description to fully understand what it means. Popular videos on the subject get to this point as well, but don't make the next clarification, which I personally think is key. This buff only works for skills used within that 6-second window. So let's break down how it works. In all cases, to my understanding, have Conviction and Judgment runes placed on multi-hit skills. This is because they are procced on a percent chance per hit basis depending on the level of rune you have equipped, with the green uncommon runes giving a 10% chance per hit and the legendary runes giving a 40% chance. So you can imagine moves that do a flurry of 5+ hits are ideal for both skills that have the runes equipped. In most cases, these skills have super fast cooldowns, so they are constantly able to have the buff go up. The process begins with the skill with Conviction attached being used in proccing the Conviction state. This state lasts for 3 seconds. In this window, you need to throw your skill that has the Judgment rune attached, and the Judgment state needs to hit. Once again, this chance is based on the level of rune you have, combined with how many hits you have on said skill. Once Judgment is active, you have a 6-second window to maximize this state. Any moves thrown within this window will receive the buffs. Moves thrown prior to or after will not. Additionally, there's a 30-second cooldown the state after you proc it. Note, this only happens if Judgment is hit. If no Judgment, then aim to hit Conviction once again after its small cooldown of state and the skill has run off, so you can aim to get into Judgment again. So why are these runes so important? Well, looking back at the brief sections that we talk about swiftness classes and their mana, this state just perfectly fits into their playstyles, most of the time that is. Fast cooldowns and faster mana regen just pair so perfectly with a playstyle that wants to have the shortest cooldowns and has a lot of mana issues. Typically these classes will pair this window with the hardest hitting skills, which tend to have the longest cooldowns and largest mana consumption. This is also quite useful for reducing long cooldowns on your ultimate, which is relatively shorter on swiftness classes, but reducing that even more is ideal, especially if you run the Dominion Relic set, which revolves around throwing your ultimate off cooldown to get its damage and cooldown buffs. The more efficient you get with this rune pair, the better off you will be at outputting the best damage you can. I hope this video helps someone. I know a majority of players may not know that they don't fully understand the pairing, as I think there's a misconception that the skills thrown before Judgment lands gets this buff, and I think a lot just know the guides say have them on and follow suggested rotations without fully understanding. I know when I was personally looking for clarification on this the first summer after release, there wasn't seem to be any clear answers out there. The search results are just full of sites like Fextra Life that legit just had the name and no info just so they could boost their SEO. And even on the forums and Reddit, there were conflicting explanations. I definitely think a video like this would have helped me out as an oblivious player back then, and ideally find someone who would need a similar breakdown just the same. For more in-depth guides of sets, rotations, and playstyles, check out the Nexus link in the description, which is a website maintained by the community with guides from experts on the classes, updating them as much as they can. If you find this content valuable, check out my previous video on the best classes to build for new, returning, or just vets who want a super relaxed alt to run with, especially now that the servers are back up and the Super Makoko Express into the Path of the Soul Eater is ripe for the picking. Have a good one.